Good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. It's just past 6 a.m. and we're starting the day at 80 degrees with a sticky 92 humidity. If you're headed out today, don't forget to pack a spare shirt. August is still on all us and on our plans too. But don't worry, Larry's here to answer your question and help your garden survive the Florida heat.
Welcome to the Home and Garden Show. Yes, we'll help you survive the Florida heat. It's part of, enjoying the outdoors. We have a little bit a hot spell, but we're not freezing. We're not shoveling snow during the winter. But if you're starting out on a garden project, which is not a bad idea. We're starting on many garden projects, even though it's 90 something degrees. If you're planting a tree, designing a patio, thinking about putting a patio in when it cools down, a perennial garden, or just a general redo on your landscape, you want to give us a call at 855-765-1045. 855-765-1045. So watermelons are out there. How many watermelons have we got, Catherine?
Almost 30 or more going up every day.
Well, I don't know. We're gonna have to open a watermelon stand out front. But how's it? How's it? I know it's always this high pressure month, August, for disease and insects. How's that doing?
Not at all.
Not at all. So,
It's
see,
very good.
which is that's incredible. The our roses are looking good. They have no disease, proper plant nutrition, and good soil. The whole thing with gardening in our area, because of our sandy soil, to get things to look good for a long period of time and to laugh at the heat, is the soil. So many times when I was gardening 30 or 40 years ago, I would try to. My solution was more fungicide, more insecticide. And that is not the solution. It's not the solution. The solution is building great soil. And we have to do that, in our area, if you want to grow certain types of plants. Now, there's some plants that will grow in pure sand, and they have the right genetic adaptations. That little ridge down the middle of Florida where they have just a pure sugar sand, they call sugar sand. Plants have a special adaptation. I forgot what the biological term is, but they have a special adaptation for growing in that condition. And that's where you find a lot of plants like carnivore plants, the pitcher plants that will actually live in those areas in absolutely no nutrient soil, and they rely on predation in order to survive. And we have some of the most beautiful pitcher plants, red, whites, yellows, all different colors, and they're very beautiful, but they don't want, and now they have that genetic adaptation, they don't want to grow and be in rich soil, but in our area, if you wanted to grow great looking landscape, great looking grass, great looking trees, you're going to have to make sure you make some soil adjustments, and it can be done, definitely. I would just, we were talking last year about, these trees that have a lot of dieback. I know certain areas where trees have a lot of dieback, and we had a Chamar's oak that was, dying back slowly, and but we, tried to, apply our principles, of good soil, bacteria inoculation, raising the cation exchange, supplying all the trace elements, and it has surged back, double the amount of canopy. And a client of ours had a dogwood, how dogwoods, get this dieback on them. And first year it had a little bit, the second year had a lot. I said, let me try to save this dogwood. And it was an old dogwood. I'm talking, it's 30, 40 years old at least. And we took the trace elements on it, and we adjusted the soil. We improved the soil organic percent of the organic content of the soil, high percentage, which will improve the cation exchange. What I mean cation exchange is how well the nutrients in the soil move from the soil to the plant, how well we improve that. Also, we adjusted the pH, and I called back yesterday. We called in spring and said it looked good. I called back yesterday to find out how it looked, and he said it's improving and there's no more dieback. And he said the bloom was, absolutely spectacular in spring. So, trees, if you have an area where your trees are, not doing good, try the trace elements, a bioinoculation of good mycorrhizas and bacteria, and apply humic acid, fulmic acid, and some organic compounds like milorganite to increase the activity in the soil. And the plant, biology has a way of, good biology has a way of trumping or succeeding even in areas where they should not succeed. When you take a soil profile, biology always has a precedence, and we've always approached it, agriculture and horticulture always approach it with the, as add more pesticide, add more fungicide, and that's what they're concentrate on. So that's a good report. So if your trees, if you're, especially if you have a weeping willow, I think that one of the things that are missing when people are growing weeping willows is they're growing in poor soil, so they're not as heat resistant. And I think that will help that on the weeping willows. Some red buds in certain areas do not do well. So bacteria, fungal inoculation. You also add molasses in there too, organic compounds, and making sure it gets the full trace elements and a balanced fertilizer. And you should have recovery of the tree. And it's not going to happen overnight because trees are very slow growing. So it happens within a year. It's, like a perennial garden or some quicker, faster growing plants. But one of my favorite plants, and it's got to be everybody's favorite plant when they see it, which would rival the rose. I think the rose is a standard of beauty and flowers. The roses has a long history, and our roses are looking absolutely spectacular. To my absolute amazement, that the roses that we have in our perennial garden are flowering. And they're just completely covered with flowers in the middle of August, which is amazing. And no disease. The cutter bees have gotten on them. I've gotten a few leaves on it, but that's it. That's it. Maybe one or two black spots, and they're getting plenty of overhead irrigation because we're putting out about 3.5 inches of water a week on that. And so they're getting plenty of overhead irrigation. Absolutely. So this rose garden culture, growing rose garden, has got to change, and it doesn't need all those complicated fungicides and complicated stuff on just providing good soil. But a great flower, you talked about a plant that rivals last week is the pomegranate flowers, the plants that they grow flowers, and they don't grow pomegranates, but they're a pomegranate tree that has just beautiful flowers. And then the lotus. The lotus is a beautiful, absolutely spectacular flower. I've always loved the lotus, and they have great looking leaves, and they love this heat that we have. They love the heat, and all you have to do provide. They come in dwarfs, they come in large plants, and you have to provide a container that's watertight, a larger container with a bigger lotus, say maybe 24 inches. If you wanted to have a lotus garden and you wanted to keep it low cost, you just get like a circular livestock galvanized container and just surround it with boxwoods, and it would actually, you wouldn't even know that it was just galvanized container, or any kind of plastic container, and that you could make look good. You could use concrete, but you got to seal the inside. But it's got to be not 24 inches for a larger one, 24 inches wide. Maybe if you a little bit wider, if you want something more in there. But they can grow in very low amount of water. It only has to be, of the larger varieties, it only has to be about 6 to 18 inches deep. So you need that plus about 4 to 6 inches of just regular mud, just on the bottom and of your bottom of your container. And of course, you got to make sure if it has a hole in the bottom, you got to fill that up. And you place your tuber or your plant just right flat, pressed down into the dirt, and that's the way to start. Very simple. And you fill up with water as you want to fill up initially low amount, even less than that. So you want to have it maybe covering the tuber maybe for maybe a couple inches. Right right so the tuber's almost from the top of the surface. And then once it starts growing, then you can go ahead and fill it back up. But they don't need a whole lot of care besides fertilizing uh, about every 2 to 4 weeks if you want a lot of flowers. Now, they'll bloom all summer long. If you fertilize, they'll bloom all summer long, up and down. And they're absolutely spectacular plant. The flowers last depends on the temperature and how much sun they're getting. They last about 5 days. And they're ornamental because the seed head is actually ornamental. So that's one of the positive things. They have kind of a silvery blue leaves. The leaf will actually grow above. You think of like a water lily lays on the water. The leaf of the lotus will grow above the water slightly, and it's a great looking plant. And I'd recommend, if you love flowering plants and you want something spectacular, the lotus is definitely one. And they come in different sizes. Now, if you don't want to get a big one, I'm talking about, it could be about 2 to 3 feet tall. Like a real big one would be Alba grandiflora, I think, and that was very, very fragrant. Now, so that one's fragrant. Now, there's that music. This is the Home and Garden Show with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design. Welcome to Home and Garden Show. I'm Larry O'Neill with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we are talking about outdoor living. If you have a question, if you're starting out on your project, whether it be your path, your pergola, pathway, pergola, fencing, irrigation, if you can't get your irrigation to do what it's supposed to do, you want to give us a call at 855-765-1045. 855-765-1045. Your grass ain't looking quite right. It's give us a call. I invite you to call us at 855-765-1045. We're talking about plants that rival the roses for those who love that great looking plants, and great looking flowers. And you could just have one, just one that could be your highlight of your patio, or if you have a small apartment and have a balcony, if you wanted a flowering plant that would really look spectacular and you don't need a lot of room, you could grow the lotus. And some of the great types, they come in basically broken down into 2 different sizes. Dwarfs, some of the dwarfs are they can be grown in a very small container. They're different than water lily. It's different than water lily. Lotus they're completely different type of plant. But you can get the monobatsu. It's a very small one. You can get a small dish and actually grow it. It's only getting around 1.5 feet, maybe tall. The flower stalk. Well, Charles Thomas, which is a beautiful pink one, it turns pink and then one day, and then it will slightly fade to lavender. It's a big one. It will get, we're talking about 3 to 4 feet tall. And what is another one? Pinklicious. Pinklicious is a very tall one. That one you could getting, about 4 to 5 feet, depends on how much fertilizer it's getting. It's amazing how big they can get. And some of them are very fragrant. Like you say, the Alba is a beautiful one that has some great fragrance on it. And during the winter, you could just haul them inside, take the root out. If it's we have the extreme, like we had like last year, we had in the 20s, you got to take them, protect, and take lift the tuber, and put it in the garage. They're used to dry out, so they grow in areas where they're right on the margin. That's between the shore and the water, deep water. So the tides rise, the river tide goes up and down all the time, according to the amount of water. So they annually dry out when they have a low amount of water, and then when they fill back up, that's when that spring frost, or where they have a surge of water, in a river in the spring normally, and that area gets filled in, and then they start to go to their flowering portion. They can be addictive, so be careful, because the flowers are absolutely beautiful, and if you just have a knack for growing them well, then they need about 6 to 8 hours of sun. So if you have a good area of sun, give it a shot, and it'll be something different. You can also do water lily. Water lilies are they're a different group, and they have tropical and cold tolerance, so you don't have to remove them during the extreme cold. But They're great plants. But like one of the greatest plants in our area in the lower southeast is the crepe myrtle. And the crepe myrtles are looking great this time of the year. And we were talking about reviving our trees, the Chamards oak, the dogwood, we revived them. And, the crepe myrtles, I know people have older crepe myrtles and they call and they say, well, they're just not blooming as well. So this year I had some old crepe myrtles. I'm talking about they're 30, 40 years old and Natchez, and they have tapered off in their flowering compared to what they were. So I said, this year, see, I never paid that. I'm not looking for a lot of flowers. They look great to me. They're not flowering as much, but I decided this year to apply fertilizer, Milorganite, like I normally used to do. I used to had more time to work on my own garden, but I got a little more Milorganite, and I got some Miracle Grow and fish emulsion, and applied it. Lightly pruned, and boom, they came back. They came back to flowering. I did one and I didn't do the other. So I could see the difference. And it was good difference. Having a lotus garden is absolutely fantastic idea. If you just even have one, and if you love flowering plants and that unusual look, and if you want to have a conversation piece by the poolside, people will be attracted to look at it. The lotus, of course, has been a famous plant since the beginning of time. But what brought our crepe myrtles, or where do our crepe myrtles come from, and how to get them to grow? I was talking about my older Natchez are 30 to 40 years old, and we applied our crepe myrtle formula, Milorganite in the winter, 4 or 5 applications of fish emulsion, Miracle Grow, and well water in our, light blooming crepe myrtle revived. And after a little bit of light trimming, and we had one right next to it, and it wasn't doing as good, didn't do as good with one without and one with fertilizer. So if you have an older crepe myrtle, it's the key time to begin to revive it is in the winter. You have plenty of Milorganite, plenty of water. Make sure they get that water breaks down and get in there, and they build those reserves, and it goes. And then fish emulsion late February 4 or 5 times, and it's back in business. But crepe myrtles, they were originally grown in China, and they were a very, very little history about our crepe myrtles. They were originally began their popularity in the Tang Dynasty. So we're talking about this plant has been around a while. Tree has been very popular for a while. And then the original guy who discovered the tree was a Swedish botanist called Lagerström, which is therefore its scientific name, Lagerström. And originally introduced in 1786 by a French botanist. And that's how they got here. And then they moved. I think even Thomas Jefferson had one at a particular place because they were introduced to the United States in 1786. And then they were originally, I think, introduced to England. But, a long time ago, people used to show instead of having, Ferrari in the front, they used to show their wealth by having exotic collections of plants. That's why you have these beautiful estates like in Italy, Como, these beautiful gardens, because these silk and spice traders had made so much money they would start bringing over these exotic plants and establishing these really exotic gardens. But that's how it came about. So the crepe myrtle introduced to the United States in 1786 in Charleston, and then look what happened to it. It became, they have every color, size, shape, brown leaves, burgundy leaves, green leaves. It's amazing what, once we got our hands on it, what we've done to the tree. I mean, we have some that are, not more than 12 inches tall, and then we have some that are 45 feet. Many different species. Now, there's some subspecies that brought those crosses into play, but they really have done some amazing work with crepe myrtles. We talked last week about bougainvilleas. People seem to be a popular topic, bougainvillea. And when you are trying to select one, if you'd like one for your garden, poolside, along your fence, I saw one where it was placed over the garage door, where they trained it all on the top, up the side. It was beautiful. When it was blooming, it was just absolutely gorgeous. And there is some difference in bougainvilleas. They don't all demonstrate the same characteristic. And I kind of broke it down into, which ones are going to be the most floriferous, because we want something to be floriferous, meaning which ones are going to have the most bloom. And for your hard work, we live in the lower southeast. We have a long summer. We got to have some things that really will do well and bloom, 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 because we need that long bloom. And the number one, I think, flower power is going to be Barber Karst. That's one of the top ones. And it's kind of a magenta color, and it's a bigger grower, but it's really prolific flowering and very durable. It totally takes the heat, bug resistant. So it's a tough one. Barber Karst, and readily available. The other ones, that one does better in the ground because it gets so big. But a super large container, a very large container, you could grow it in container. Bougainvilleas love to grow in containers because they love that cramped, dry condition. That's what they really like. Another one, which is be on the top of the list, is New River. And that's a really what I like about that one. It's very, very resistant to humidity, and it's a tough plant. Get around 30 feet tall, and it's a very tough plant. And it's going to be a repeat bloomer. There's repeat. How they break down flowering is repeat, continuous, one time. This one's a repeat, and then another, for those who want to have one in a container, let's say by the pool side, is a Rosanna. Pardon me. It's a pink, kind of a gold color, and it's really prolific. I mean, it's really prolific. You don't have, if it's in a container, it's going to flower, and it's around 2 to 4 feet. So it's not going to be hard to manage. This one's more shrubby like, and it's going to, there's some of the big tall climbers, and then there's the ones that are shrubby. And that one is a shrubby type, even a small container that would do well in there. And it's going to be blooming pretty much on and off during this whole season. Then another tall, prolific, high humidity tolerant yellow flower is called Gold Rush. That's a very, very powerful grower and bloomer. And some of them, like orange and pinks and whites, you got to kind of coax them along. They don't really, they bloom, but you need to be more of an expert at getting them to bloom. After you acquire some skill, they're not as prolific. These, you just, they'll just go, you give it the right conditions barely, and they'll start blooming heavily. Another one is Temple Rock, and that one's a shrubby one, and that one there is basically a continuous bloomer. That means you're not going to see it without a flower. It's really, really a great flowering one. It's kind of a pinkish red color, and it's not a big one. So easily in a container. So practicing the dry out. When to really get them to bloom well is let them dry out, turn the container on side, block them from getting any water until they almost drop their leaves, or they start dropping their leaves. That's a good sign. You want them to drop their leaves. When they stop dropping their leaves, then you want to turn them right side up or move them out into the water and put a little bit of fertilizer, Miracle-Gro, and fish emulsion on them. That's what I use. And boom, they're back in the flower. And they will be absolutely covered. Any of these, if you do that, you will not see any green. They'll be absolute solid color. And reliably. These are the easiest ones to grow, and you're not going to have any issues with them. In the pool garden, when you have a lot of these screened-in porches, and we have in the lower southeast, and getting plants to grow there, it can be a little difficult, because of the filtered light, high filtered light. The screen blocks out a lot of the light. You can grow it definitely if you like the tropical look. Cycads, a lot of cycads, or like sagos, the relatives of sagos. You want that palm look, can grow in those high filtered light conditions. But one plant that there really is overlooked a lot in a pool side, because you want to have some structural plant, is the tree fern. And the tree fern is it's a very primitive plant, and Australia, is one of the places they come from. And it develops a stalk. They can be 6 or 7 feet tall, and they can have leaves out maybe 10 feet, 8 feet. And they'll grow in that low light condition and even in containers, but they'll need a good amount of water. They like good water. They like reliable water. Unlike cycads or like sagos, they can take it completely without ever watering them. If they're in a container, you just leave them alone. We have cycads in containers. Once we put in the container, water them a little bit, get them going. After that, we never water them again. And they can, and they're in the full sun. They can take just off the rainfall. And in the winter, maybe we'll put water a little bit just because it's so dry in our winters. But the tree fern is going to need some more water. So keep it in containers, and they'll grow in those tight little spots. When you have those little cutouts for planting, they'll grow there. But they need some room to develop their frond, and they'll get that broad spread for that tropical look. And underneath them, if you wanted to have an underplanting that would be really colorful, you could try philodendrons. You could try, any golden philodendron. Malonii would do. Prince of Orange would do. There's dozens and dozens of those beautiful. Congo would do. Beautiful philodendrons that have, colorful leaves. And the ferns, fish emulsion they love that. They love that organic, and the philodendron love it. So they have the same growing type environment. And we have probably about the golden Malonii philodendron, my favorite one. I think I have about 20, my own personal ones. And I'm telling you, once they put that fish emulsion on a little bit of Miracle-Gro, or you can use slow release, you can use compost on them. They love that organic environment, and they just launch off. And I'm going to recommend golden Malonii. Philodendron is one of the most beautiful philodendron there was another one called Weeks Red is kind of a beautiful one, but there's nothing like golden Malonii, in my opinion. I've looked at all kinds of philodendrons, variegated, the big golden bright yellow leaves when they come out, and the pinkish stem or the trunks they have, and then the covering on the leaves is kind of a pinkish, and then the regular leaves after it matures a little will turn more a darker green. Gotta have one of those. Believe me, if it's well grown, you got about a 25-gallon or a large container. It's spectacular, and it will get a lot of attention. And we are talking about outdoor living, pond, your pergola, how to grow great bougainvillea, and bougainvillea deserves a spot in everyone's garden if you love color, and if you're starting out on a garden project, whether it be your bougainvillea, planting a new grass, building a new walkway to your front door, or you were trying to add some curb appeal. We have some great ideas. And if you discover something that works good in your garden or your landscape, and you want to share that with us, give us a call at 855-765-1045. So what do you recommend for this weekend of nice heat?
Oh my goodness.
Catherine.
First, water the plants.
Oh, water the plants. Okay, I got that.
And then for peaceful, relaxing Saturday, 2 options. The Riverside Art Marker.
Yes, we like that. Yes. We like that.
Under the bridge. It's great to walk slowly and support small businesses. And another one is go to the Vicious Green Mark.
Oh, the sand. Get the sand. Okay. Go to the beaches. So there's a lot of great things. Watering the plant, and this in the morning, early in the morning. It's relaxing. Getting your containers watered, checking out the results in your vegetable garden is always fun to do. It's a relaxing morning. At least it's only 80 degrees outside. It's warming up the end of the week, I guess, but we had a pretty good week last week. I mean, the Monday it was only 82 or something, 83 that day. And wow, it's just dropping down there, and boom, it's back up. But in August, that's the kind of the month where it's in between the 90s and the 80s, and it's starting to, daylight's shortening. We got the daylight's really starting to shorten, and also the temperatures, believe it or not, are coming down. And then in September, we'll be in the 80s, and then October will be those months that we relish. October, November, December, January, February, March, April, and then May starts warming back up. So, you have to have at least something not perfect, otherwise, we'll get spoiled, in certain areas of the world, where it's at that 7 degrees every day, like in some maybe in, what was it, Bogota, the high today is like probably around 68 or 70 degrees, but the lawn is, can be at its peak condition because, St. Augustine loves a lot of water. They love this rainfall we're having. And with this warm temperature, people always ask me, is it too hot to plant grass? No, not really. You gotta water it, okay. But it is warm grass, warm season grass. That means this grass likes it when it's hot. Up north they have cool season grass, like fescue, all those other types of grass that grow up there. But we like warm season grass. And if you're starting on a new sod project, if you have your grass, this is one of the biggest mistakes, that your grass is done, and you're okay, we're just going to resod, we're going to remove it and resod. That is a big mistake because grass isn't normally supposed to die. You can plant a lawn and it lasts you your lifetime. It doesn't go away. It doesn't have a life expectancy. So if it dies, or if it's looking weak and you want to replace it, it's best to find out what's wrong. It's always something wrong with. You always got to go to the baseline, the soil, and the soil. Have a soil test before you plant new grass. I have people all the time, just recently replaced the front yard, and then as soon as they replaced it, it started dying again, and or not looking good, I asked him, "Did you do a soil test?" He said,
Larry's garden. One of my favorite things about the South is great weather, which means more time for outside. And at Larry's Garden, we design, install, and maintain a cracked driveway. We do it. Need a patio, pergola, deck, or pavers. We do it. At one company, Larry's Garden, completes your entire project. No subcontractor done by Larry's Garden employees. No water, sod replacement, takeover. We do it. Let one company, Larry's Garden, complete your entire project. Weekly maintenance for communities and commercial locations is also available. For more information, visit larrysgarden.com or call 346 Design, install, maintain. Company, complete project. Larry's Garden.
We're going to Ginger. She has a question about caladiums. Hello, Ginger. I do too. They're beautiful. Comes back. Have you grown the Thai caladiums, Ginger? Oh, Thai caladiums are absolutely beautiful. I mean, they're so much different than our caladiums. Some of the color ranges are magnificent, and we're talking about some of the foliage can be bright yellow, bright red. The Thai is. It's weird when we have two different groups of people in different parts of the world hybridizing plants, and they come up with a different idea, then we come up with a different idea, the two different types. But Thai caladium, they're worth the investment. And I've grown them before, and they're very, very unusual, very, very beautiful. And the other thing that they do better than our hybrids, the ones that we normally get in America, is that they grow in the full sun. Many of them can take the full sun. Oh, yeah, right. Thai caladiums are a little bit smaller leaves, and that could have been the one that growing in the full sun and very vibrant color. Yeah, they'll like, they like good soil. They like organic, well-drained soil. That's their favorite thing. That's their favorite. It's outstanding. I agree with you. White in night or in the shade garden, even at night, they're visible at night. You know what I mean? And that's a nighttime. If you want to be outside or if you wanted a shade garden, white is a great color in the shade. It makes it more visible. Yes, that's a great one. And one of the great things about this Ginger is that people are always struggling in our area with deer resistant plants, and caladiums are deer resistant. So if you have a shade area and you want to get beyond Asiatic jasmine, getting beyond, we should have a book, getting beyond Asiatic jasmine, and go with caladium, and caladium's a great way to really add beauty to your landscape, interest and color. It's a low maintenance flower. They actually do flower, but their flower very attractive. What fertilizer caladiums with? What do you figure is your best fertilizer? Yes. Yeah, they don't. That's why they like. If you can plant them in compost, more compost in the soil, they do it better, and they like a pH between 5.5 and 6.5. So they like a little acidic. So under oak trees is perfect. You know what I mean? It's a perfect environment and a perfect plant for a container. You know what I mean? For a beautiful color all season long in the shade. And a lot of times people have a little apartment and they want to have some color. That's a perfect, easy going plant, to take care. Yes, absolutely. It's a great plant. I'm glad you called about that because I always forget about caladiums. I don't know why. Oh, you'll be absolutely amazed. Absolutely amazed. Absolutely amazed. Yeah. All right. Great call, Ginger. Thank you for calling us. All right. Those caladiums, are just get beyond Asiatic jasmine and go with caladiums and have great color. And they do lose their leaves during the winter. Just lightly cover them with mulch. They come back every year, beautiful color, a little or no fertilizer. They don't like a whole lot of fertilizer, just a little bit to get the best of it. And we were talking about tree fern in the low light areas, like in the pool side, and that would be a great plant to plant under your tree ferns. Besides the philodendrons we were talking about, caladiums in the little cutout area that you have in your your poolside area, and you want beautiful color. Caladiums would be good there, and they're a bulb. They're bulb, and so they're available. They'll be available late in the season. But a little. You may be able to get some mail order now. Some of your best selections are going to be mail order. Unfortunately, you don't find them everywhere. Some people have them available. I think in the spring, like you buy the bulbs in the spring in a bulk amount. They're not really commonly available, but they're definitely worth it. And once you plant them, and you get it, they will not grow well and will not return if the ground is soggy during the winter. You got to make sure that wherever you're planting is, not going to be in standing water, because they do not like to be in standing water, especially when they're dormant. But we were talking about grass, and one of the people planting grass all the time, and grass is a lifetime product, a lifetime plant. You should be able, once you get it planted, it should last you your life. And oftentimes, the big people call in and want me to replant their grass. I always, what are you doing before you plant this grass again? Have you figured out why it died? And they said, I'm just replanting. Somebody said, maybe I need to try centipede, or maybe I need to try zoysia. I have all kinds of things, people tell me about. First, you need to always check before you begin to plant. You need to check your pH. You need to check if you have some grass that, half alive and half dead, it's the remnants. You need to have a disease evaluation. What is the disease this plant has? Check the pH. The pH is the number one thing on the list. Then do a soil test. The best soil test, checking all the 8 elements of trace elements and the 3 macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. I know that a lot of our soil, Florida soil, is high in phosphorus, but I've just recently ran into 3 soil tests where the phosphorus was low, and you need phosphorus. So normally I use phosphorus is low on my list when I'm checking soils. I've actually got three consecutive tests where the phosphorus was low. So you want to check the macronutrients. You want to have a soil test that checks chlorine, sulfur, molybdenum, iron, copper, zinc, manganese, magnesium, and those are the ones you want to have checked. Those eight essential amino trace elements. And after you conclude that, you want to look and see what is our adjustment. A lot of times, when you send a soil test out, some companies will ask you what you're growing there, and they'll give you a recommendation. Some of the more sophisticated labs, they don't really give you a recommendation. They do more of an analyze the soil. Some can actually check the bacterial and the positive bacteria and microorganisms in the soil. That's another test that you have to pay for, but it's not so much necessary on that. But you want to make sure that you look at what they would recommend to bring up the nutrients up to normal amount, and that can be fairly easily before you plant your new grass. And if you are working in a shade zone, a shade zone would, I would say that you're only getting maybe 2 hours of direct light and maybe high filtered light. Floratam St. Augustine is the worst St. Augustine for shade. St. Augustine is by nature going to be shade tolerant by nature, more so than Bermuda, more so than zoysia, more so than centipede and other grass. But if you're picking a St. Augustine type, which would be Floratam, citrus blue, Seville, palmetto, just all different kinds. St. Augustine, some more cold tolerance, some less cold tolerant. Raleigh's a cold tolerant. Some from Texas, it's chinch bug resistant, like Captiva was supposed to be chinch bug resistant. All different types of St. Augustine. You want to pick one that's shade tolerant, and they'll be rated. And you can look up the rating. And one of the ones that we like, of course, is Citra Blue. That's very shade tolerant, and we planted it out in dense shade, and it does really well. It stays compact. It doesn't any longer. So picking the right type of St. Augustine is the next. Or if you're St. Augustine's, and we are talking about outdoor living, whether it be your caladiums, your Chamards oak, or how to make a curb walkway, to really improve the overall look of your home. Walkways are very important. The entrance is very important to your house. If you're starting out on a project, or you have any great ideas, like introducing us more talk about caladiums, putting it to the forefront, a garden-worthy plant for sure. You want to give us a call at 855-765-1045, 855-765-1045. We were talking about, replacing lawns or beginning with a new lawn. Always check the pH, always do a soil test, always. It's very, very important. I got a new pH tester out, just try it out. I'm trialing it we trialed one for one brand, and we're going to trial this. I'm buying a bunch of cheaper pH meters and seeing which one. So we're doing a try that this week to see how it works and if it's worth the $79. So a total of $79. If you're gardening and you wanted to know what your pH of your vegetable garden is, a good little handy tool to have. $79 is not a whole lot. And it gives you great measurement. We'll see how accurate it is, how it stacks up against $500 pH meter that I got. But and we'll go from that on that. Selecting the type of grass is very important. And we were talking about Floratam, which the low. I looked at the Journal of American Horticulture, and I did a sod St. Augustine test, and I just curious, and I've discovered that Floratam is the worst for the shade of the group of St. Augustine, but Seville would work good. And then also you can find which is the most shade tolerant St. Augustine, if St. Augustine is your select, and they come in different sizes. You know what I mean? You can have a St. Augustine that's a dwarf, like Seville, and if you want to mow and you want to select a dwarf, because dwarfs, cut your mowing. You could go maybe 2 weeks with a dwarf, and it will be a little longer, but 2 weeks is not impossible with a dwarf St. Augustine. So if you cut your mowing, we're mowing 35 weeks a year, and you cut it in half, that really reduces the amount of mowing, or you can cut it by 1/3. So understanding what size the grass is going to be. So those are the things. And also, one other thing, some of these grasses are going to be known for their disease resistance, and some of them are going to have Their weak points is their lack of resistance. So understanding that. So whatever grass type, I know it's a little more detailed than just going down to the Sawtelle. I'll take some St. Augustine. They're just going to give you Floratam in our. But if you can order what you want, it's more suited to you. And especially if you're growing in the shade, you're going to get the end result that you want. But it pays a little bit more. You'll have to pay a little more for certain varieties, but it's going to get you the end result. And how much are you going to think about $20 or $30 more a 500 square feet? Not much. After 5 years, it's not thinned down to zero, because it's not, the grass is not shade tolerant, and you're trying to figure out what to do next. You're not going to think about that extra $30 when it looks, and, trying to revive. Another thing, we're bringing it up since we're talking about plugs. Plugs are, if you're on a budget and you want to fill in an area that's die, and you can take your own plug. And we planted some Bermuda for a fellow, and he liked the results so much he wants to fill in certain other areas. And, you can buy a device that's made for taking plugs, and you just push it into the ground. It will stack inside of the cylinder that you press into the ground. It has you just jumping on your feet, takes a plug, takes a plug, takes a plug. It will hold up to 5 plugs. And so before you take the plug, you want to cut out the area. You use the plug machine to cut out a section of dirt in that area. So when you just come back over that area and release one of the plugs into the hole, so you can have, and that what makes it pretty low labor. I mean, you have a machine or it's a device, a tool, will remove the dirt for you, and at the right depth and everything, and then you just go over there and take the plug. It gets the right size plug, exact match, and you plug it in. During this time of the year, the warm season grasses are filling in good, as long as you get a little bit of fertilizer on. Great water is good for us, especially heat. You gotta have water when you're working outside in this heat. We're sweating and it's super hot. You got to keep high. But great water in your home, doing the great job as a water softener, keeping your appliances good is very important. The experts on water are going to be affordable water. They've been in business for decades and decades. We're talking about experience. And when you have that type of experience, you know how to fix problems, and you know how to install correctly, and answer the needs. If you have a particular problem, well water, you have a particular problem with your drinking water, they understand water, and they are the water experts. Affordable water. You want to give them a call at 904-262-0197. Especially well water. We have a lot of people using well water, and it's a good idea to have it to take a look at. They'll come out and do a test on, and if you're not getting good service of your water softener company, you don't even know where they're at. They just can't put one in, and they've disappeared. Affordable water, 904-262-0197. Grass types are always important. It's probably, most people don't know that there's 50 to 100 types of St. Augustine. That most people don't understand that. And same thing with the zoysia, if you're putting zoysia down. But reinstalling or doing a lawn, know the grass type. Also, if you're switching your grass type from St. Augustine to, say, maybe Bermuda, maybe zoysia or Caesar paspalum, you got to remember these grasses like to be mowed low. They can be mowed taller too if you need. You'll need to have a better grading. And St. Augustine is very forgiving on grading because you cut it 4 inches, and when it's cut 4 inches, it don't have to be perfectly flat. But when you're putting down Bermuda, if you really want the lawn to look good, Bermuda has to be cut at a lower level. Ideally, if you can cut your Bermuda 1 inch or less, it's going to look good. It will really improve the overall look of it. And it does definitely help with weed control. A lot of weeds that are not going to be able to take short chopping. So grading, leveling, you need to spend more time on it. And it's going to be more cost as when you put down zoysia versus or Bermuda. if you wanted to mow, if you want to mow. And then, like I said, there's dwarfs, and so I planted, I grew myself in my own landscape. I had Geo, and Geo was a very, very slow growth. The shade tolerance, it took some shade, but I could get away with not mowing that lawn for maybe 30 days. Maybe if I want, no problem. I could not mow it for 4 months. In the tallest it would get would be about 4 inches and be dense at 4 inches. So so keep that in mind when you're doing zoysia. If you want to not mow, just have a little taller zoysia, to have more of a natural that, I would consider a natural look that behind some of these dwarf zoysias can slow down the mow if you don't want to mow as much. And when you do mow it after it's 4 inches, it will be brown because it's shade out the brown. The when you mow it low again, it will be brown because the upper portion is shade out, the lower portion and it loses its leaves on the bottom. But it will pop back green. Just water, put a little fertilizer in it. So knowing the types of grass, what conditions you want, what needs you have. If you have a lot of foot traffic, if you have pets, some grasses can accept, dogs peeing on, and St. Augustine's going to more accepting that and not having a lot of browning out. Bermuda and zoysia would have. Spend the time to do it, but to add to the end result that you're going to get, and figure this is a lifetime project. You don't have to replace the grass. You're not supposed to replace the grass every 5 years. Make sure you do the preparatory work to make sure you won't have any problems. But this year, I think I'm going to replace. I'm going to replace the hydrangea in my garden, and I'm going to go with this new hydrangea. I've grown it before, but it's not a new hydrangea, but it's a native hydrangea of Florida. It's called a smooth hydrangea. And I'm going to grow incredible hydrangea. It's a white hydrangea, and it has very, very large flowers. I'm talking about the flowers are going to be at least, they can get up to about 10 inches in diameter. They're going to be in white, and they do have some blush pink varieties. They want this particular hydrangea morning sun and afternoon shade. And it's a great hydrangea, prolific flowering, and this particular one blooms on new wood. So, versus the older hydrangea macrophylla, the Japanese, those blue and pink, but the older varieties bloom on old wood. So that's a little bit different pruning schedule. So it's some of the great advantages. But I'm going to give it a shot, change out the hydrangeas and because we have a shady front yard, and we're going to do that. By the way, all the tropical gingers are just absolutely looking. If you color right now, in August, and you have a tropical garden, Hedychium gingers are really blooming well. Hedychium gingers. You have Disney, Annabelle. There's just all kinds of, great looking gingers right now that are flowering orange, and they mostly oranges, reds, yellows. They have a whole group of the white is a white ginger. You see this sometimes growing on the roadside. They're very fragrant, but this one's a dwarf. It can grow in a container. And gingers do adapt to growing in containers. It's kind of a tall orange one, maybe around 4.5. That one is grow in a container. And then also when you're picking a Hedychium ginger, look at the growth habit. Pick the growth habit that's great for you. Some have large leaves, some, smaller leaves. We have this one variety called Disney. It's very straight up and down, almost bamboo-like. And some of my workers are not familiar with gingers that much. They think it is a bamboo, but then they realize it has a flower. Very heat resistant. And the great thing about Hedychium ginger is it's flexible on the lighting condition. It will bloom in medium dense shade. It will bloom in filtered light and bloom in full. The only thing is as you further you move it in the sun, the more water it wants in that moist environment, and will grow in sodden soil. So if you have an area where it's moist and really never dries out, Hedychium is one of the gingers you should, and to get for that nice tropical look and very fragrant. Some of them are very, very fragrant. If you have 4 or 5 or 6 plants planted together to give you a nice tropical look, there's going to be that very aromatic fragrance. If we have a cold, now this is another thing about a cold, is that they'll burn to the ground, but they'll come right back up in the spring. They can go all the way up to, say, 8A, 8A. They can grow in 8A. So that if you have even below 20 degrees, if you have a little bit of mulch on the top, they'll come right. One of the amazing canna lilies we planted, I finally found this canna lily for a tropical garden that we maintain, and we keep adding specimen plants. Canna musifolia. If you want that, really broad leaf, vigor, robust plant, and then it's Canna musifolia, and then it has a flower, and it gets about maybe 10 feet. In fact, we have a lot of these plants. Some of our plants we have posted on YouTube. If you have the time to look on Larry's Garden on YouTube, we post some of our bamboos, these unusual plants. You can look at them and see if they're for your, that have good examples of them. But we have Canna musifolia posted there. It's very up, and some cannas really don't like a lot of moisture, and they will develop rust. This one is 100% rust resistant, disease resistant. The insects, the grasshoppers, I don't know those lubber grasshoppers on it, but it's a great tropical plant. Blended in there with your queen palms, blended in there with your bromeliads. A phenomenal plant with hardly any care necessary for that tropical look. But if I talk to people coming back from California, and they always remark on how nice their gardens look in California and how to develop a California style garden. You want to kind of minimize the grass. In fact, in some of the plants they really use in California, I'm from California, Orange County, California. They're going to use a lot of agaves, and agaves in California have that silvery blue color, very structural. Agave whale tongue is a beautiful agave that will develop over. And not all of agaves are alike. They have this type to the century plant, also called the century plant, the types that sucker up a lot. And I'm not a big fan of those. I want to have an agave, and I don't want it to be, all those little pups growing underneath it. I want that clean look. And another plant they use to get that California, the high texture garden is Yucca rostrata. And that is a great yucca. It gets about 4, maybe 6 feet tall. You can buy silvery blue foliage. It has a trunk. It's unusual that it has, and a great addition to a California landscape. And Phormium. Phormium is, I have Phormium lanata, which is very, very heat and humidity resistant. Originally from New Zealand and Australia, but they're a gramifolia. That means they have grass-like leaves, but the leaves are very wide. I'm saying they're probably around 2.5 inches wide. Lime green with yellow striation, and the leaves will get about probably around 5, and a huge flower. When they flower, the flower stalk maybe 7 feet, 8, maybe 12 feet tall. It depends on the typing. And Linatum is a one that will tolerate the humidity. Not all of them will tolerate, but it's definitely a structural plant and give you that California look. If you want to have a California style garden, you want to give us a call at 855-765-1045. 855-765-1045. They have it easy in California. Dry weather, good that, the soil's great, the temperatures are cool. It's easy street for gardening land. Of course, they have difficulties growing tropical palms, even though it's warm there, because of the dry weather. Tropical palms don't dry weather. Most tropical palms. There's tropicals is kind of a weird, kind of a misunderstood rain type environments in tropical, and there's also dry type environment. We're planting some palms that can take it very, very, very dry, and they're from the tropics, but they're in the dry. On the leeward side and the windward side of an island, sometimes they're divided by a mountain range. The leeward side has all the rain, no rain, and the windward side has all. If you wanted to really enhance it, add a little bit of curb appeal to your landscape, I was just thinking, what is an easy thing to do? And is having a driveway border. A driveway is a huge piece of concrete, takes up a lot of your overall appearance in your landscape. That's why it's great if you can have pavers or accentuate your driveway with a great design and accent. And one way to accent your driveway to kind of blend it into the landscape and into the overall picture we're putting is have a driveway border. A low border is great on a driveway, and have something with some color. And some of the things that we like to use in a driveway, Neptia is a great low growth dry. These minimum Walker's Low is a great. Chelsea Blue is another great. It's pretty much an ever perennial. Will produce flowers, very small flowers, but a mass of them will look good. But you can mix it with Blue Days. Blue Days is another low. Maybe Coreopsis. These new Coreopsis, you can feel confident if you're planning if you want to have a driveway garden mixed perennial and shrub garden. I wanted Walter's Viburnum, which is a great flowering shrub, and I wanted some, which would bloom in the spring. Or if you have it in a shade area, you can use some dwarf hydrangea in a shade. And but Coreopsis, big uptick. Any of these Coreopsis, once they start blooming, they're absolutely covered in any perennial gardens we have been just covered with color with flowers. And the color range is going to be yellows, pinks, red, kind of a tangerine color, whites, creamy whites, a huge color range. And there is some range in size. They're going to from about 1.5 feet tall down to maybe 12 inches tall. So once you plant them, they're one and done. Put them in the trim them back in the winter, and they'll start to maybe fertilize once or twice before they start to bloom, and they start blooming in around June, and they're going to look great. You can line one way driveway landscape is you can put in some muhly grass. Muhly grass, beautiful and it has that great greenery during the growing season. Miscanthus, is another grass. If you would like to approach it from the grass, and because grasses are very low maintenance, and you can pack them in, and you are not going to have many weeds because you're moving lawn. Your next issue is not mowing, it's weed control, and weed control when you have more flower beds, you got more weeding, and you want full plantings to avoid weed control. Well, that's that music. Thanks for having us this weekend. This is the Home and Garden Show with Larry's Garden Landscape and Design, and we'll see you next